Good morning. Let's talk about the 5-paragraph essay. I know if you're a high school student, you've been around for a while. I know you've heard of this whole concept of the 5-paragraph essay, and you know it seems pretty simple. It seems pretty basic and straightforward, and it is for the most part. But I want to go back and try to fine-tune some of those ideas about the 5-paragraph essay that maybe you haven't thought about before, or maybe take a look at a new way of considering what the 5-paragraph essay is all about. So let's talk about the beginning part, right? The introduction. And of course, the introduction is difficult to write because you're staring at a blank computer screen, you're staring at a blank sheet of paper, or however you decide to create your compositions, and you're trying to think about how to get started. And introductions are really tough for that reason. And so I know you've done some pre-writing exercises to get your ideas down and those sorts of things. But let's talk about this introduction and maybe think about some ways, some frameworks that we can hopefully make our writing process a little less difficult, and give us some strategies for working with that. So let's take a look at some strategies. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to address is this issue right here, the attention grabber. And I know a lot of people have been told that, when you sit down to write a paper, you want to write an attention grabber because you want to grab the audience's attention. And I agree, we do want to get the audience's attention, but we also have to consider that writing is different from speaking. And a lot of times when people sit down to write an attention grabber, they sort of come up with one that really works well with a speech, but doesn't work so well with writing. And part of the reason for that is because the physical context, the rhetorical situation of writing is different from giving a speech. And I listen to speeches all the time. We listen to teacher workshops and keynote addresses and things like that. And the speaker might come out and tell a joke or do something just to get us all sort of focused on what this person's doing. You don't have to do that with writing. You don't have to grab their attention with a sort of a cutesy phrase or a magic trick or anything like that. And that's something that I hear from students a lot is when they say they don't like the whole concept of doing the attention grabber because it makes them feel like they have to come up with a zinger or something really profound or funny or something like that. And with writing, it's not that way. So that's why I sort of phrased it this way. Attention grabber, yes, but you don't have to sound like sorry if you're a used car salesman, but you don't have to sound like a used car salesman or a cheesy commercial pitch or something like that. This isn't the blowout sale where everything must go, that kind of language. And I know people have said to me, well, I kind of feel like I have to use that carnival barker language to get people's attention, and I feel really silly doing that. And you probably should feel silly doing that. Let's talk about some ways that you can approach that situation without feeling silly or without doing something that's going to detract from the purpose of your paper rather than adding to it. Okay, so one of the things that I know you've probably been taught in some of the lower grades is to start out with a question. And that's a good way to get started if you're in middle school or maybe if you're a freshman. But then we need to grow beyond that. So that's why over here it says begin with something other than a question. Be original. So a lot of times I'll get papers that say, have you ever done blank? Well, I have, and let me tell you about it. That's a great opening for a speech. It's not such a good opening for a formal essay. First of all, because it uses the generic you, and we're not supposed to be using personal pronouns in formal writing. It changes the tone, it changes the voice, and so we're not giving a speech. We're giving a formal essay. So we don't want to ask a question and then answer our own question. I suppose there are some forms of writing, in magazines, columns, and things like that it might be acceptable. But let's try to do it another way. The problem with that is that if you get used to doing that, that becomes sort of a crutch, and that's sort of the only way people know how to do it. So we'll explore some other ways to do this. And this is what I suggest right here. Begin with the larger context into which your narrow / focused topic fits. So if your topic happens to be climate change, all right, think about that. That's your focused topic. Think about the bigger context into which that narrow topic fits. Climate change. Okay, so what is the big category that climate change might fit into? And you might find multiple ones. Within climate change, we're looking at, think of maybe some other big political issues that are going on. So climate change has become kind of a political issue. So you could think of some other popular political issues that are happening today and maybe start off with those and narrow it down to climate change. Or if your topic is a little more focused, if you want to do alternative energy sources or a particular alternative energy source, say wind power, you could maybe start out with several types of alternative energy sources, maybe name some others like geothermal and hydroelectric power, solar power, and so those are some things that your author or that your audience is probably likely to have heard before. And so you're grabbing their attention by not only doing this, finding the larger context into which your narrow topic fits, but you're also doing this, known information. You want to grab your audience's attention not by coming up with a funny joke or a magic trick or something like that. You want to grab their attention by talking about something they might be familiar with. Whether they're really knowledgeable about it or not, they're at least familiar with it. And that's how we get, that's how our attention is grabbed at sometimes. When, say, and I like to use the example of if you've ever been anywhere, say you went on vacation and you went to, let's say you went to Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, and you and your family had a great time there, and you saw some really cool things, and and you're all just kind of watching TV one day, and Wheel of Fortune is taking place in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's the background, and there are all kinds of buildings and things that you've seen, and so you might be the only person in the room watching the television, and you see a bunch of things going on from Nashville, and you might call your family members in and say, hey, guess what? The Wheel of Fortune's in Nashville. And then, we've been there. And so it grabs your attention because you're familiar with it, not because it's snappy, not because it's a zinger of a phrase, but because it's something you are familiar with. If you are, an example that I like to give also is, if you're out of town, if you're far away from St. Louis and something about St. Louis comes on TV, your eye is going to automatically go to that television because, hey, there's the Arch, there's my hometown, there's some things I'm familiar with. So grab your audience's attention by bringing up some things that they're likely to be familiar with. And of course, you don't always know who your audience is. A lot of times you don't know who your audience is exactly. So it's hard to tell what those people will be likely to be familiar with. But we know that most people who would be in a situation to read your paper would probably know something about climate change or might know something about alternative energy sources. So you start out with the known information. And you know what? Your teachers do this all the time, especially your math teachers. Very seldom would you start off the school year in a math classroom and the teacher immediately hits you over the head with brand new concepts because you're going to be lost, right? So in math class, most of the time, you're going to begin the semester by reviewing some of the concepts that you did the previous year or the previous semester because you want to give, your teacher wants to give the students a running start. They want to give them sort of a hook to attach that new information. And so The known information is a really good way to start out your paper. Think about what your audience is likely to be familiar with. Give them a little bit of review. Give them a running start. And then you can start to begin to introduce some new information. So somewhere along this line, we start introducing some new information. Information becomes more specific as the funnel narrows. And that's why we like to think of the introduction as kind of a funnel shape. And then as we work our way down, we gradually work our way into new information, just like your math teacher would at the beginning of the year. We've done some review. We've seen work through some problems that you're likely to be familiar with. We've refreshed your memory. Now it's time to show how that new information connects to that old information. So you've got a nice cohesive bond there to make that information meaningful for your audience. And then you work your way down to the thesis statement. And the thesis statement is super important. It's one thing that, without a thesis statement, you don't really have a paper. And a thesis statement is a statement. It's not, sometimes I've asked students to show me where is your thesis statement, and the student will sort of wave their hand over the entire introduction and say, well, it's pretty much this whole thing. And no, that's not a thesis statement. A thesis statement is a statement. It has to be a statement. And again, just like with this element here, I suggest that you not use a question as your thesis statement, but frame it as a statement. Okay? That's not to say that you could never have a question as a thesis statement, or that professional writers don't do this sometimes. But again, if we get into the habit of only asking questions in our thesis statements, then that's the only strategy we'll use. We'll use it as a crutch. So a thesis statement. And again, in middle school, some of the lower grades, you may have come up with thesis statements that sound something like, in this paper, I am going to talk about blank, and then you fill in the blank, right? Well, that's okay in the 6th grade, in the 7th grade, but not in the upper grades, not as we move into sort of thinking about college level writing. We have to make a statement that the rest of the paper is going to prove. It's just like in a court case. An attorney might say, I am going to prove that my client did not commit this crime, and here's how I'm going to do it. Right, so that's a thesis statement, but you don't want to use the generic I, right? You don't want to use personal pronouns, because then it becomes about the writer and not about the subject matter. So you want the focus to be on the subject matter. A thesis statement doesn't say I am going to talk about anything, because you're not really going to prove in that paper that you're going to talk about something. That sounds a little immature, I guess, for high school writing or for college writing. So a thesis statement has to be a statement. It has to be something like, wind power is one of the most efficient means of alternative energy. Okay, so the rest of the paper is we know it's going to talk about wind power, but it's not just going to talk about it, because talk about is really general and not specific enough. But what are you going to prove about that particular subject matter? What are you going to prove about wind energy, and how and why? And you're going to really get into depth and explore that topic. Okay, so there you have the sort of the introduction in a nutshell. There are lots of different ways to do introductions, but this is a really good sort of a framework to think about how introductions work, and what you should do with introductions. Now, I always say that an introduction should be a paragraph long. If you have a really super long paper, if you're getting into 25 and 30 page papers, your introduction can be a little bit longer. But for the most part, when we're doing 5 or 6 page papers, anything up to that point, probably should stick to about a paragraph. And my rule is that a paragraph is somewhere between a third and a half a page. If it's typed and double spaced, that's a good length for a well-developed paragraph. And I know some people like to say, well, a paragraph is at least 5 sentences. Well, if I say that, sometimes what I get is 5 really short, choppy sentences and a really underdeveloped introduction or an underdeveloped paragraph. So if we go with a half to or a third to a half a page, that really helps us get some development into our paragraphs. And so the thesis statement, again, is the foundation for the rest of the paper. It's sort of like, I like to think of this funnel as kind of like if you've seen a documentary. Say it's a documentary on a really obscure tribe of people in the Amazon rainforest. And you might have maybe a map of the world. The opening scene is the map of the world, and then the world's spinning, and then the world stops on the Western Hemisphere, and then it zeroes down into South America, and then it zeroes into the country of Peru, and then it focuses even more on a particular segment of that country. And then after that we have real pictures of the rainforest, maybe an aerial view of the rainforest, and now we're zeroing in on the actual tribe that we're going to be focusing on. And so that would be the thesis statement. Here's our aerial view, here's our continual focusing in a little at a time, and then this is the particular tribe that this documentary is going to be all about. This is going to be the focus of our subject matter. Okay, and now we have what we would in a 5-paragraph essay refer to as body paragraphs. You have 3 body paragraphs in a 5-paragraph essay. And I've had students ask me before, well, why is it 3 paragraphs, 3 body paragraphs? Why is it not 2? Why is it not 6? Why is it not some other number? And I really don't have a definitive answer for that. But I do think that probably 3 major ideas is the least number of ideas you can get away with and still do justice to just about any topic. It takes at least 3 legs for a stool to stand. So, if you've got 3 things supporting whatever you're trying to support, then, it at least is going to be able to stand on its own. So we move into major idea number 1. Now, depending on the length of your paper, if it's just a couple of pages, yeah, that's probably going to be a paragraph. But in a lengthier paper, and certainly the papers you'll be writing in college, I don't call this paragraph number 1, I call it major idea number 1, because that major idea can be 2, 3, 4 paragraphs long, maybe even longer. Who knows, depending on the topic. All right, so each major idea, though, needs to be introduced. Don't start off with something really specific right away. You want to orient your reader. Again, this is audience awareness. Think about what your audience is likely to be or to do as they're reading your paper. So the first thing you want to do is to give them some sort of an orientation. And you begin with what is called a topic sentence. Now, I've heard it also referred to as a baby thesis. And I suppose if that's what you're used to, you can go ahead and call it that, but sort of a more formal way of saying it is a topic sentence. This is what this major point is going to deal with. So it is kind of like a miniature thesis statement that introduces the idea. Now, you don't want to resort to the sort of the middle school introduction or a topic sentence that says, first, I am going to tell you whatever, because first of all, you're not telling, you're writing, and you're not using the I and the you, you're not using personal pronouns. So you start out with a statement that contains keywords that deal with the topic and the larger concepts to be explained later in the paragraph. So what is this paragraph? What's going to be the focus of this paragraph or this major idea? And a paragraph really is a unit of meaning. It's not just a convenient place to slide the text over. It is a unit of meaning. You should be able to name each one of your paragraphs by the time you've finished with your paper, and that's a good way to test to see if your organization is good in your essay. So start out with some sort of an introduction, and then begin explaining the idea or concept. Now you're getting into the specifics, and this is where we get into the concept of levels of specificity. This is where you deal with the general idea, sort of the heading of the subject matter. And then we get into support. And support means you're giving specific evidence. You're giving specific ideas, examples. As it says here, example/supporting evidence number 1. Here's the first piece of evidence. Here's the first way I'm going to prove that this concept is true. And if that doesn't work for you, then I'm going to give you another piece of supporting evidence. And sometimes 2 bits of supporting evidence might be enough, depending on your topic matter or your subject matter. You might have to give 3. You might have to give more than that. I don't know. It depends. All depends on your topic and what you want to do with it. So example, supporting evidence, you want to give, this is the most specific part of your paper. And if you're using sources, this is where you would want to support your ideas that you've already explained with a quote or a paraphrase or a statistic from your research. This is a good place to put that. You don't want to start it off with a quote or a statistic. You don't want to end with a quote or a statistic. You want to put it here where the most specific parts of the paper go. And then you want to end that idea with kind of a small conclusion. But the best way to conclude an idea like this is to tie it back to the thesis statement. And it looks like my sentence got cut off there. But it says this gives the paper unity. This gives the paper cohesion. It shows us that all of this exploration of the idea and sort of swimming around in the evidence isn't just so we can learn about this sort of out of context, but it ties it back to the thesis statement. Sort of like saying, and this is how all this information proves my thesis statement. Okay, so you've wrapped it up. You've come to the end of major idea number 1. And then you move on to major idea number 2. And you see that major idea number 2 works almost exactly the same way as major idea number 1. You begin with the topic sentence that introduces the idea. It contains keywords and larger concepts to be explained later in the paragraph or paragraphs. But then we add another element. The introduction to major idea or major point number 2 should also smoothly transition from major point number 1. So this is where we get into the transitions, and transitions serve a particular function, more so than just saying, well, now I'm moving from this idea to this idea, but transitions show the relationships among ideas. What does major idea number 2 have to do with major idea number 1? And so it shows the context. Again, it gives your paper cohesion. And it most importantly shows the relationship between the 2 ideas. All right, and then we follow exactly the same pattern. You begin by explaining the concept. You move on to supporting evidence number 1, again, the most concrete and specific part of your paper. Number 2, number 3, a quote or a paraphrase if it's research, and then you conclude it by tying back into the thesis statement. Okay, we go, everything ends by coming back to the thesis statement. And so you see how that's going to tie your paper together, how it's going to give it unity, how, you can continue with that pattern throughout the paper. Major idea number 2, of course, you move on to major idea number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, however many you want to do. But you see how this is sort of the same thing as a 5-paragraph essay, but it grows from within. It's sort of like tree branches. Rather than adding a bunch of other new ideas, what you might want to do is if you have a 20-page paper or something really long, rather than adding major idea number 1, number 2, and then continuing on to, now I've got major idea number 15, oh my goodness. Rather than just keep adding more ideas, how about if we take major idea number 1 and we let it grow from within and let it split off into 2 major ideas that are related to that major point. We get more specific into those ideas, and we let it grow from within. It's kind of like cell division. You remember from biology class, right? When human beings are created, there's the sperm and the egg, and they come together, and they don't just keep adding more cells. They grow, they split, they grow, they split, they grow, they split. Everything in nature does that, right? Trees do it. They grow, they split, they grow, they split. And so writing is a very organic process. It's very much the same way. Let your ideas grow from within rather than just tacking on more and more and more and more new ideas. Develop your ideas, make sure they get more specific, and let them grow from within. And now that's everything in a 5-paragraph essay, pretty much, except for the conclusion. And we're going to save the conclusion for a different video, okay? But for right now, this is where we're going to go with this. This is the basic rundown of my take on a 5-paragraph essay. I think it moves us from sort of the middle school and freshman and sophomore level into something that's more mature and something that's more likely to get you going into the college level and the types of writing that will be expected there and beyond the college level. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. You know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions. Thank you very much and have a great day.